Roswell UFO incident, or Roswell UFO crash of 1947, is probably one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known, hallmark of ufology and the research into aliens. It's one of the stories that really started it all for many people, or at least brought the topic of UFOs into the public eye for the first time. And for the first time really had people questioning whether we were alone in the universe. Now, for those of you who don't know or are possibly new to this topic, the Roswell incident relates to a crash near Roswell, New Mexico, of a purported unidentified flying disc. A rancher by the name of Mac Brazel had found debris from the crash site as he and another person rode their horses out to check on sheep after a fierce thunderstorm the night before, and as they were riding along, began to notice these unusual pieces of what seemed to be metal debris scattered over a large area. Upon further inspection, he said that he saw a shallow trench several hundred feet long that had been dug into the ground. And from that point, the Roswell crash would go down in history as one of the most hotly debated UFO conspiracies of all time. Now, whether you believe that what happened that day near Roswell was in fact a crashed alien craft wherein which bodies were recovered, or you believe what the government had said was nothing more than an experimental weather balloon, what many of you may not know is that there was another famous crash that happened before Roswell, just a month before, in fact, that has been just as hotly debated and is itself surrounded in mystery and strangeness. And that is what has become known as the Maury Island incident. So what was the Maury Island incident, and why is it such an interesting case to study? Well, a brief summary of what happened here was that in June 1947, again just a month before the famous Roswell crash, two men by the name of Fred Krisman and Harold Dahl reported seeing what looked to them as flying donuts in the area, after which, and according to versions of this legend, it was said that the incident involved one or more UFOs that had either dropped something or had crashed and disintegrated, the fragments of which damaged Krisman's boat, killing a dog, and according to some versions, hurt someone. Subsequently, Krisman and Mr. Harold Dahl, who was the other apparent witness, were approached by men in black, and from then on, the story gets very strange. Now, the story gained further additional coverage when a government plane crashed, a plane which was said to be carrying fragments from the Maury Island incident. And of course, if you have researched this story, you'll know that the FBI file on this incident indicates that the Bureau quickly determined that the matter was a hoax. But as you read deeper into it, you'll see that everything is not so easily explained. Now recently, and after a Freedom of Information request, the FBI files pertaining to this incident were actually obtained. The Maury Island incident was only one example, a part of what have become known as the SMX files, which is an abbreviation for Security Matter X, the name given to the files by the FBI. Now, these files were very close to what you might think of the X files, and dealt with many stories and incidents of high strangeness that the FBI investigated back in the 40s and 50s. And after these files were released, and you read more into the FBI's investigation of this incident, but not only the incident itself, but the witnesses of the incident. One of those witnesses, again, a man by the name of Fred Lee Krisman. And as I said earlier, the FBI file on Krisman indicates that the Bureau determined the matter was a hoax, but what many people fail to realize is that in the same exact file, the FBI was careful to note that the witness did not admit that his story was a hoax, but only stated that if questioned by the authorities, he was going to say that it was a hoax because he did not want any further trouble over the matter. Now, if you look up the Maury UFO incident on Wikipedia, for instance, the summary, the very short summary, reads, and I quote, "The Maury Island incident in June 1947 refers to the claims made by Fred Krisman and Harold Dahl of falling debris and threats by men in black following sightings of unidentified flying objects in the skies over Maury Island, Washington. It then further says that Mr. Dahl later retracted his claims, stating that the story was a hoax, but also indicates that Mr. Dahl had stated, if questioned by the authorities, that he would indeed say that it was a hoax. Mr. Chrisman and Dahl said that they were harbor patrolmen out on a workboat who saw 6 donut-shaped objects in the sky near Maury Island. According to Chrisman and Dahl, one of the objects dropped a substance that resembled lava or white metal onto their boat, breaking a worker's arm and killing a dog. Dahl claimed that he was later approached by a man in a dark suit and told not to talk about the incident. The story was later retold in Gray Barker's book, They Know Too Much About Flying Saucers, which helped to popularize the image of the Men in Black in mainstream culture. The substance claimed to have been dropped by the UFOs was found to be, quote, slag from a local smelter. Years later, it says, Dahl confessed to a reporter that the incident was a hoax. But is it really? Well, let's go ahead and go over a few things. The first thing we'll start off with is that, although some believe that it was a hoax, there are many who didn't, including that of a Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, who is the head of the FBI, who did not believe that it was a hoax. In a teletype dated August 14, 1947, Hoover stated, quote, it would also appear that Mr. Dahl and Chrisman did not admit the hoax to Army officers. And FBI agent in charge from Seattle, George Wilcox, answered, please be advised that Dahl did not admit to Brown that his story was a hoax, but only stated that if questioned by authorities, he was going to say it was a hoax because he did not want any further trouble. So there's your first piece of evidence right here. We have an eyewitness of the UFO crash stating perfectly clear, as was documented in the same FBI file, that if confronted, he would claim that it was a hoax in order to stay out of trouble. Mr. Fred Chrisman not only didn't admit that it was a hoax, but in the January 1950 issue of Fate, he called those accusations a, quote, bald-faced lie. So the next question is, who is claiming that the Maury Island incident is a hoax? Well, the main person behind this narrative is a man by the name of Edward Ruppelt, who is the one-time head of the U.S. Air Force project investigating flying saucers, who identified it as a hoax. Now, keep in mind that the Maury Island episode took place in the summer of 1947. Ruppelt took charge of Project Blue Book in 1951, over 4 years after the incident occurred, and wrote the report on unidentified flying objects in 1956. According to Ruppelt himself, time seems to have blurred his memory, and he admitted that this was a, quote, era of confusion for him. Another man by the name of Dr. Edward Condon was also convinced that it was a hoax. In his scientific study of unidentified flying objects that was unfortunately neither scientific nor a study, he discusses the Maury Island case in only 115 words, where again he chalks it up to nothing more than a hoax. William Hartman, who was a staff member of Condon's, also agreed that it was a hoax. But where did Mr. Condon and Mr. Hartman get their information? Well, from none other than Mr. Edward Ruppelt, the head of Project Blue Book, who didn't officially look into the incident until 4 years after it happened. So what exactly do we know about the Maury Island incident that would help us to decide whether this was a hoax or not? Well, we know that in Puget Sound Harbor, between Tacoma and Seattle, Washington, Mr. Dahl and his teenage son Charles and 2 other crew members and a family dog were patrolling for salvage logs when they saw 6 huge donut-shaped objects in the sky. The objects appeared to be about 100 feet in diameter and of a bright metallic appearance. 5 of the objects were circling a 6th, which looked as if it were in difficulty. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and the 6th vessel discharged a quantity of metallic residue. Flakes of the material similar to aluminum and some additional material, which resembled cooled lava, fell from them. Some fragments hit the boat and caused damage. One fragment injured Dahl's son, and another killed the family dog. One of the circling discs approached the malfunctioning disc and in some fashion, quote, jump-started it. All of the discs then rose rapidly and vanished into the skies. Mr. Dahl reported the incident to Fred Lee Crisman, who contacted Ray Palmer. Ray Palmer then sent Kenneth Arnold $200 to investigate. Now, at the time, $200 seemed like such an enormous sum of money that when Arnold bragged at the office of the Idaho Daily Statesman, the editor sent a telegram to Air Force Intelligence to report about the event. On the 1st of August, 2 Army Air Corps officers, First Lieutenant Frank M. Brown and Captain William L. Davidson, who had been sent to investigate the incident, were killed when their B-25 aircraft carrying the photographs of some of the alleged UFO residue mysteriously crashed. What happened next becomes even stranger. On August 3rd, Mr. Kenneth Arnold's airplane was sabotaged and he nearly escaped being killed in a crash. And there was a rash of other mysterious deaths after this happened, including Paul Lance, who was the Tacoma Times reporter, who was dead just 2 weeks after this incident, under mysterious circumstances. A short time later, Ted Morello, who was the United Press stringer in Tacoma, also died. Ray Palmer, who was another news editor who had originally reported on the investigation, was fired. The Tacoma Times, a newspaper in business for over 40 years, then went out of business. Afterward, Mr. Crisman, and who had served 30 months flying in the Korean War, had his flying status revoked and was labeled by the Air Force a, quote, undesirable and unreliable officer. So let's move on to the crashed debris at Maury Island, or what the FBI called slag from a local smelter. What we do know is that the original cigar box of fragments was mailed by Mr. Dahl to Mr. Ray Palmer. This box was then stolen from Palmer's office, which begs the question, who would want to steal a cigar box of slag? Furthermore, just before it was stolen, Palmer sent some of it out for analysis, the results of which indicated that it was neither slag nor natural rock. It's also interesting to note that the version of what the FBI stated this debris was varied from that of slag from a local smelting plant to, quote, strange rock formations found from a gravel pit on the island. Now, lastly, the story of Mr. Fred Crisman continues to grow stranger when, in the late 1960s, he was fingered as being one of the people responsible for John F. Kennedy's assassination. Now, of course, hundreds of people were accused, with varying degrees of alleged complicity, but he was one of the more investigated individuals when this happened. In fact, he was called to testify for the grand jury at the trial of Clay Shaw, which was the only criminal prosecution and trial that ever took place in attempts to address the JFK assassination conspiracy. Some believed that Crisman was there during that day and held some sort of unknown part in the assassination. He was later released and the investigation ended after it was found that he had not been in Dallas on the day of said assassination. So there we have it. It's a very complicated and convoluted topic of research. And again, it would seem that the FBI and the Air Force have attempted to inject much disinformation into this story, and who have stood by their claim that it was nothing more than a hoax, and that one of the sources allegedly admitted to it being a hoax. But just remember what Mr. Dahl stated, that when questioned about it further, he would always claim that it was a hoax to avoid further trouble. And it would seem that that is just what he did. So again, I will let you guys be the judge here. There's a lot of strangeness surrounding this incident. In fact, so much that it would be impossible to fit into one single video. But I just wanted to give you guys a brief summary of one of the most famous UFO incidents that you've never heard of. And that is rarely spoken about in this research. So, thank you guys for stopping by today. Be sure to throw me a like if you like the work I do, and stick around because I've got a lot more coming, and I'll see you all back very soon. Stay safe, guys.